Welcome to Bitcoin Fixes This, where we explore the impact that Bitcoin will have in all aspects of society. Today's guest is me. I'm going to answer listener questions about all kinds of things, including quantum computing, war, fiat money, morality, Christianity, and anything. I asked for all kinds of questions and I got them. Hopefully you will enjoy this episode. All right, how's it going, guys? Welcome to another episode of Bitcoin Fixes This. I am going to do listener questions. I do these once in a while, usually when one of my guests like delays or something like that, and I have to kind of scramble. And this is how I usually end up doing these shows with listener questions. But they are relatively popular, so I do want to get to them. And this time I did post that I would take questions about anything, not even Bitcoin related, and we'll see what questions you guys came up with. I did look at some of them, but not all of them, and I will try to answer all of them unless they're obviously trollish or trying to promote scam or something like that. All right. So these two were from YouTube, but it says the morning show, I guess, asks, I was shocked to see how many Ethereum nodes exist. I had assumed that Bitcoin had the most users running the software. Could you speak on the differences between Bitcoin full nodes and Ethereum full nodes? Well, the thing about Ethereum full nodes is they're all like by one provider. It's Infura, it's on Amazon. And you kind of have to trust that they are running it properly because most people don't have the skills to run an Ethereum node. I mean, it's many terabytes of data at this point, and you have to essentially have some serious specs on your computer to catch up because, a lot of disk writes and stuff, it's bottlenecked there. And, the number of blocks are going faster than your computer can actually validate them. So what a lot of people end up doing is using some sort of fast forward or checkpointing. This is where you just assume that things up to a certain block number are valid and then just kind of go from there, which is a cheat. You're not really validating everything, and that's the whole point of running a full node. It's validating that everything is fine and that you are verifying for yourself that the software does what it's supposed to. But because Ethereum's changed its rules just so many times, it's hard fork after hard fork after hard fork, and each of those introduces new things. The software gets enormously complicated. Not to mention, they have an account-based system and not a UTXO-based system, and it's very memory intensive, and having to calculate everything properly is very difficult. This is why people don't know what the actual supply of Ethereum is because it's changed a bunch of times, and the architecture just isn't very good for auditing, which is actually the whole point of blockchain. So, if you count Infura, I imagine there's a decent number of Ethereum nodes, but it's all by one company. So you're essentially trusting a third party to provide you blockchain data. You might as well be using a block explorer or something at that point. But yeah, for most people, it's, I would say there aren't that many Ethereum full nodes running, and the requirements are enormously high. All right, the other question I don't really understand, so I'm not going to cover it. All right, here are some questions from Mastodon. This is bitcoinhackers.org. I do have a presence there, and I retweet everything there. All right, what am I wearing? I am currently wearing a shirt and shorts. I have a slate of Bitcoin shirts that I rotate in the comfort of my own home when I am out and about and on stage or at different events and things like that. I generally wear a button-down shirt and jeans and a cowboy hat and a belt with some sort of dragon symbol and a buckle and some boots. That's usually what I wear. And the reason I do that is because I really do love the 1800s cowboy era where it was all about expansion and looking outward and building something. And that's where the U.S. went from a backwater British colony to a world superpower in about 100 years on the backs of people that were, in many ways like self-made men and self-made women. So, that's why I wear what I wear. I'm not sure that was the actual intent of the question. It did sound a little trollish, but I chose to answer it the way I chose to answer it. All right. When do you think quantum computing will pose a threat to cipher integrity? And what will crypto do to counter it? I don't think it's going to pose a threat for a long time. And this is because even if you do get certain types of quantum computers, they're not going to be very fast. You have to understand that the processes involved are just insane. Like you have to keep atoms at nano degrees above absolute zero in order to get some sort of like weird quantum states that you can actually measure. And there's a lot of error involved. So there's a lot of error correction and things like that. And you have to run these calculations many different times. And even doing it one time is very, very difficult. And the media likes to make it sound as if we're on the verge of a quantum breakthrough, but vast majority of the things that are actually going on in quantum computing is mostly marketing. The companies that sponsor the quantum computing research, they're big companies, and you have big departments and a lot of politics going on, and you have a lot of these people that are in these R&D departments that want to show that they're actually making progress even when they aren't. So I don't think you can really trust what they're actually saying about the progress of quantum, because of course they're going to say, oh, in 5 years we're going to have something amazing. It's always like that with these R&D departments. Otherwise, like, they wouldn't exist. If you said, "Hey, we're not going to make anything useful for the next 10 years," the company would shut them down. So, I don't think it's really posing a threat for a long time. I don't think quantum computers are inevitable. It's like cold fusion. A lot of people thought that it was inevitable in the 80s, that we would have this amazing energy source that anyone could do using fusion. If you watch like Back to the Future 2, this is like a part of the plot is, they have Mr. Fusion, which they bring from the future, and it's a cheap energy source that anyone can use. Reality's not like that, right? Like there's no way we're getting cold fusion in any of our lifetimes. It's just too difficult, and quantum computing is very much like that. It's just not happening. Let's just put it that way. And I'd be very surprised if it does. Of course, that could be proven wrong. But there's whenever the media gets behind something, that's when it's probably not going to happen. That's just they're not very good at like sort of inducing research breakthroughs. Generally, those happen in the background. Not by the famous people, but by people that are willing to try all kinds of different stuff and things. This isn't a project that's really readily available to the amateur, and those are the people that actually make the breakthroughs typically. It's only available to people that can get access to like a Faraday cage and like absolute zero near with atoms that are operating at near absolute zero and so on. It's just not happening. I really don't think so. All right. Mind Mining asks, how do we need to allow the government to take part of our wealth stored in Bitcoin when taxes were paid on the money to buy Bitcoin or the equipment to mine it? The government had no part in creating, maintaining, or structuring Bitcoin, yet they want a claim on it when it becomes more and more successful. Since Bitcoin is money, there should be no additional tax on it, like gold in the Netherlands. Do you see any possible reason for taxing Bitcoin? Well, I'm kind of against taxes in general. They're there as like a way for the government to steal money from you without your consent. I mean, if you agree to it or whatever, I suppose in some way that's okay. But in a sense, like, taxing Bitcoin or taxing any like sort of capital gains, it's taxing it twice because you had to earn it first, and then you have to pay taxes on the money you've earned on the money that you've earned. So it's and if you lose it, they don't suddenly give you like a giant deduction. You're limited in the deduction you're allowed to take because you lost money. So it's sort of like a one-way street, and it's not very good for productivity. So I don't think, the reason for taxing Bitcoin is because the government wants revenue and wants to punish people that own Bitcoin and so on. They do a lot of stealth taxation through inflation anyway, and that's sort of their preferred way to go about it. Though for appearance's sake, they have to tax in other ways as well. But yeah, I mean, I don't think it's just. I don't think it's legit. I don't think it's moral. How do you tax free speech, and what will happen to free speech, if we allow this as a society to happen? Is one number taxable but another number not? I think you're essentially, making the argument that Bitcoin is speech. And this is like sort of like one of those tenuous arguments that everyone makes around anything that they want to support, is that it ends up being free speech. I don't think you need to go that far. It's just unjust to tax, period. I mean, it's, tariffs and customs duties and things like that. That sort of makes sense because you don't want certain things entering your borders. And that's like common defense and things like that need to be funded. So that kind of makes sense, and that's how the U.S. federal government funded itself for a long time. But yeah, I don't think you need to go out to, hey, it's free speech, therefore it's bad. You can make arguments all you want, but the government's going to do what they want to do. I don't think these arguments really make that much of a difference. Ultimately, arguments, are arguments. It's kind of a government does what it wants to do, and it's a very sort of authoritarian, dark way to look at things. But that's kind of how it is right now, and it's been for the past year and a half. How much of a headache would it cost Bitcoin development if GitHub were to begin censoring cryptocurrency-related repositories? I don't think it would be that much of a headache, actually. Git is meant to be sort of distributed and so on. In fact, if you have a full history of a Git repository, anytime you clone from GitHub, you have a full history of the Git repository, and anyone else can clone directly from you as long as you're willing to run a server. It's just that we've made it kind of centralized because it's convenient and you can do code reviews easier and things like that. But yeah, I mean, you would lose some of those, but there are alternatives. GitLab, for example, has a hosted version that you can run locally. I'm sure somebody would do something like that or the equivalent thereof, where you're running a Git server. And I think Vladimir Vanderlaan is hosting it over Tor. So like if GitHub ever goes down, you can just go clone from there, and all the core devs know where that is, and it's part of the email list, and there are other channels in which you can get that information and so on. So I don't think it would be that big of a deal. Git and Bitcoin kind of have some parallels if you understand how Git works. It's kind of like the way Bitcoin works. Like there's a hash that points to a previous hash and so on, much like the Bitcoin blockchain, right? Each block points to a previous one, but instead of a single chain that's sort of authoritative, with Git you can have many branches and merge them back into the middle and so on as people work on it. So a lot of there's some similarities there, and it's supposed to work in a distributed way, and it very well could be decentralized if need be. It's just that everyone would have to run their own Git server, which is, to be fair, like available on any Linux distro, where you can run a Git server. Of course, you have to open certain ports and let other people know about it so they can clone from your repository instead of GitHub or whatever. But it's entirely possible, and that would be actually a really cool project for Umbrel or Start9 or any of these like node companies to do, is host a Bitcoin Core repo on your local machine as well, and make it available to other people so that they can go clone it, and always sort of like keeping it up to sync. It's not that different than syncing the Bitcoin blockchain. And it's probably a lot less data because there's just much less code than there is the blockchain. So it would be interesting, and we could certainly do it, and it would probably make the network a lot more resilient to single points of failure like GitHub. But yeah, it's not a single point of failure, at least as far as Bitcoin is concerned, because we have that. All right, great question. All right, let's take a look at the Twitter questions. How is life at the moment? Well, life is pretty good. I'm enjoying myself, and spending a lot of time with my family and things like that over the summer. So that was really good. Bitcoin is obviously doing well. So a lot of the financial stuff that I think I would otherwise be worrying about, I'm not really worrying about. So life is very, very good, and it is amazing, and I'm very grateful that I get to, do stuff like this, right? Like, record a podcast on listener questions, and, write newsletters and books, and, teach people Bitcoin. I have to say, it's not a bad life. Emacs, Vim, Nano, Kakone, or Ed. I am an Emacs user. I used to use the predecessor of Nano, Pico, back in college for email. And that's actually how I got into Emacs, is that a lot of the keyboard shortcuts are similar. By the way, if you have no idea what I'm talking about, these are programming editors, or like code editors that a lot of people use. For people that use IDEs and so on, they have a specific IDE that they have, like Visual Studio or something, or something else. I'm very anti-IDE. I think they're a crutch, and I think you should debug everything on command line or something like that, and that's usually what I try to do. I am an Emacs user, and yeah, I do realize it's a little more bloated than Vim. I do know how to do certain things in Vim, and at some point I do want to learn Vim a little more, because it is so lightweight and less costly in terms of memory usage and things like that. But that said, I know a lot of stuff in Emacs, and it's very convenient. And there's a whole bunch of stuff in Emacs that you can do that I don't know about. But I have had to go in there and adjust the list code, because I wanted to edit remote files like directly and things like that. I've done that before, and it's very, very convenient. So I continue to use Emacs, although, I think Vim is fine. Nano's a little too weak for me, and, I don't know what Kakone is, or I feel like I've used Ed before, but I don't know. All right, how's graftroot and cross-input signature aggregation going, and are they on track for the next soft fork? Good question. I don't know if graftroot is really coming. Taproot, I think, will get us most of the features that we want. Cross-input signature aggregation, I think a lot of us would like to see, because it will expand the anonymity set for pretty much every transaction, like making it like a few large transactions per block instead of, lots of little transactions that you can track and so on. That said, like, I think any prev out is the next thing that people want. That said, I've heard the argument that, like, maybe we should let the protocol ossify. Maybe we don't need another soft fork. And I'm starting to become a little more sympathetic to that view. I get that there are features that we want and so on, but there are other layers above Bitcoin for a reason. And those can effectively add all sorts of features that you can't necessarily add in the first layer, because, changing anything in the first layer is difficult and should be difficult. And, it's for that reason that we have, Bitcoin has the credibility that it does now. Whereas, all these other chains that, change everything every 2, 3, 6 months or whatever, they don't have the credibility, because they're constantly changing the rules. And, eventually one of the rules that they'll change is the supply and so on. So, they might deny it, but it's always a possibility if you're willing to hard fork. So I think, I would like cross-input signature aggregation in particular because it is sort of incentivizing coin joins, which I think a lot more people will do. But at the same time, it's the privacy stuff is much better suited to Lightning and other layers, maybe even on top of that. That I think I'm not sure if even another soft fork is completely necessary. That said, if there's something that the community agrees on and so forth, I definitely support it, especially if the benefits are clear and so on. But at this point, I'm not sure. All right. I've seen you write quite a bit about the visual arts and its decline on a fiat standard. When you walk into museums and galleries, do you find there what you think many artists today are lacking? Yeah, I find modern art to be crap. I don't know. What can I say? None of it inspires me. And the essay I pointed to in this week's newsletter, which is a literary critique of a short story about Weimar Germany, based in Weimar Germany, pointed out this fact that art began as a representation of the real, right? And that was what art was. When you drew a picture, it was of something that already existed. It's essentially turned into a simulacrum. It copied the original idea, but it got less and less representational over time, starting with the Impressionists and going all the way to, Picasso and, the postmoderns and so on. It got less and less about actual reality and more about sort of unreality. It no longer resembles anything. It's a copy without an original. So I don't find that compelling. I find representational things to be interesting and different, but modern art has no meaning whatsoever. There's no anchor in reality, and I really just don't like it. I think it's a lot of it is just kind of gross. It's when I look at a weird Picasso painting, I don't sit there and go, wow, that's beautiful. I actually say that looks like my kid drew it. Or when I look at a Jackson Pollock painting, it just looks like a bunch of sprinkles on a canvas. It's like, well, it doesn't mean anything. It's abstract it's a representation of a representation of a representation. And it's so abstract that it can mean whatever they want it to mean, and at that point it's completely meaningless. So I think the thing that these artists lack is actual reality in their paintings, and if it has nothing real in it, then why the hell are we looking at it? So that's my opinion. Satoshi Cat asks why, and I will answer because it is kind of a profound question in the sense that this is the unanswerable ultimate cause kind of question. You can sort of ask why in an infinite regress, and you never get to anything satisfactory. And I remember doing this when I was little, right? Just I would ask why to each question. If you ever watch Animaniacs, there was a little kid that kept doing that. It's like, why, and then the person would give up and say, I don't know, kid, and she'd say, okay, thank you, I love you, good, bye, something like that. And it does have sort of like an infinite regress nature to it, and I think that's kind of part of reality. It's that there is a sense of needing to go back to an ultimate cause, and ultimately you have to settle on an uncaused cause. And if you're Christian, that's what you call God, and you can figure out some properties on it if you do some philosophical analysis on it, which for some reason a lot of people just do not do and are not interested in, even if they say they are interested in it. This is the playground of philosophy, what Aristotle and Plato would call metaphysics. This is what you're supposed to think about. Okay, what is the nature of reality and so on. Anyway, thank you for the profound question. Zone Fog, build a citadel or stay put. I feel sometimes that we can evangelize best like Christ if we walk with the no-coiners and pre-coiners. Yeah, build a citadel or stay put. I mean, it really depends, right? I think, I found that if I talk about Bitcoin to people that are uninterested, they're never really going to get convinced. Similar about my Christianity, right? Like if I talk to people about Christ that are not interested, it doesn't really do anything. The people that it does impact are the people that are kind of interested, and you sort of open an avenue for that conversation. And usually they, you do need to sort of like randomly encounter them, but sometimes they'll ask to meet with you and things like that, and bring up the conversation themselves. So I don't think it's all that difficult, to evangelize, and it's not evangelism necessarily, like sort of making the analogy between Bitcoin and Christianity. It's not necessarily converting the people, because that's not what Christ said to do. It's more about getting them to be disciples, or people that are obedient to Christ. That's a very different thing. And I think that should be the goal for Bitcoiners as well. It's not getting people to understand Bitcoin necessarily. It's getting them to, buy it and hold it, and understand, not just understand what Bitcoin is, but actually do something with it so that it actually betters their life. And oftentimes, a lot of people don't want to better their lives. And that's the reality of a lot of people's lives. They like being in misery, and they'd rather hold on to the grudges or pride that they have, rather than the freedom that comes from Bitcoin. And similar thing can be said about Christians too, right? There are people that don't want to learn about Christ or whatever, because they'd rather hold on to something. At least that's my opinion. All right, 100-fold impact asks, I noticed Microsoft Excel calculates accurately to 15 significant digits. Is this related in any way to why there are 8 decimals in Bitcoin? So any computer is going to have trouble with floating point calculations, because they're not easily representable in binary. So especially like base 10, if you do like 10.5, that's a repeating decimal in binary, right? Like, because 0.5, well, no, 10.5 would be not be, it would be like 10.3, something like that. That would be an infinite decimal. So anything with floating point is not going to have necessarily a very accurate calculation, just because there are, you have to carry, you have to make sure that everything is accurate and that you're holding enough digits and so on. And there are languages which allow sort of that sort of thing. But it blows up after a while. Like if you're using floating point math, and you're multiplying, numbers with like a lot of decimals, then you're going to get to keep that level of accuracy, assuming all the numbers are completely accurate. You're going to have to go further and further to the right in terms of number of decimal points. So at least with most computer science things, you want to keep them discrete. That is, whole numbers, and those are much easier for computers to handle. So in the case of Bitcoin, the way Satoshi Nakamoto made it is, one Bitcoin is 100 million Satoshis, but Satoshis are the base unit. So you can essentially treat everything as an integer just by multiplying by 100 million for, per Bitcoin or whatever. And in fact, there's no concept of Bitcoin. It was a convention that Satoshi made. In the protocol itself, it's just Satoshis, and the limit is 210 quadrillion Satoshis, not 21 or 2.1 quadrillion Satoshis, not 21 million Bitcoin. And that's how it works. But the number of decimal, the number of digits in there is it can't fit in 8 bytes, in 4 bytes, so it's fit into 8 bytes, which allows you to get to 2 to the 64th, which is equivalent to like 183 billion bitcoins, or whatever that times 100 million for a number of sats. So The number of significant digits is like that in Bitcoin because you work with discrete numbers, which are a lot easier to work with. Microsoft Excel, does something completely different, and it's because a floating point map is hard for computers. Let's just put it that way. Hey Bitcoiners, how exactly does Bitcoin fix some company like Nestle that pillages all the water in a community for their own profit? So I think under a Bitcoin standard, you have more specific property rights. Now, it is possible for the government to own the river and then give rights to that river, or like not care about what's actually happening in that river, like in this Nestle case, right? The problem is with public property. As soon as like the river is considered public, then everybody owns it, which means that no one owns it, and that means that Nestle is going to pollute it or use it to their advantage, which is exactly what's happening in something like that. But when you have private property, if certain people own parts of the river and you pollute the river and your part of the river gets polluted, well, you're going to sue. And that's how, you get them to not pollute the river. Once it's no longer a public resource and it's a private resource, then it becomes a problem for whoever actually owns that property. That's how things get resolved is through, essentially some sort of conflict resolution if somebody is taking advantage of somebody else's property. So now how does that come about because of a Bitcoin standard? Well, you can still have democracy and things like that, and large states that own large tracts of land or whatever. But my personal feeling is that there will be smaller states and they'll more or less not own that much, right? The concept of public stuff is a little bit odd because we all kind of own it, but no one owns it. But it's really owned by the people in power, but they don't really own it because they're only in power for a short amount of time in most countries and so on. So it's kind of a strange thing. So I think with Bitcoin, it leads towards a more rational policy of having more private property, including rivers and things like that. Will you be taking the death needle? No. What do you think of CoinJoin, and do you do it? I don't currently use CoinJoin. I don't think the anonymity sets are large enough, and I don't really need it at the moment. Though, of course, like the time to do it is now rather than later. I don't know. The protocols generally require specific amounts of Bitcoin and things like that. I haven't found one that's user friendly and anonymizes sufficiently with a large enough anonymity set. So I don't really do it yet. What's the word on biomechanics of health? I'm not sure what that question is. All right. What are your favorite books on Christianity? I'm a big C.S. Lewis fan, so I think Mere Christianity is one of my favorite books. But pretty much I've read everything by him, and a lot of those books are amazing. The Great Divorce, Abolition of Man, The Four Loves, A Grief Observed, Surprised by Joy. Like, just there's so many really good books written by him, and he writes in a very clear style. And if you have read him and have read some of my books, hopefully you could see some resemblance, because I try to keep his style of using simple language to describe stuff with a lot of clarity. Other books that I've read that I've really liked, I like the older stuff. I have tried to get into like Aquinas with Summa Theologica. That's a very dense book and very technical, but I do appreciate it whenever I can understand it. I can't understand all of it because a lot of the arguments are fairly technical from a philosophical point of view. There are other Christian authors. I appreciate some of the popular ones that have gone out. There's a lot of people that write, popular Christian books. I think I've read, I've read a lot of them, right? Like, Tim Keller and Andy Stanley and many others. I've at least heard of them or read some of the summaries or something like that. That said, I like the older stuff, and I like going back to the source, the Bible. That for me is a lot easier to comprehend instead of trying to learn from other people. That said, there are good books that are coming out that sort of analyze different things and give you sort of insight into what the Bible verses say. So I like those too. So, but yeah, C.S. Lewis definitely. Thoughts on the El Salvador Bitcoin economy? I think it's great because now if you want to start a business in El Salvador, you don't need banking services. You just run a Lightning node and you get to work, right? Like you get a Lightning wallet on your phone and you start selling your goods and services, and you can take payment and so on, and it's great. It works very well, and this is sort of like the least friction. You don't need government permits, you don't need government permission, and that's oftentimes the thing stopping a lot of entrepreneurs is sort of like government interference, and this is what will probably help build the El Salvadorian economy, and I think it's great that Bitcoin is sort of helping there. We'll be watching pretty closely. And I'm glad that the president there supports it, though I don't think it was necessary. All right, what is your favorite high time preference architecture? Ancient, megalithic, Renaissance, etc. I think what you mean is low time preference architecture, stuff that has lasted. I really like like the Vatican. I think it looks absolutely gorgeous. The building itself. And of course, like all the statues in there, and I believe Michelangelo was the architect on that one, and the Sistine Chapel, like going in there was one of the greatest experiences of my life. Just seeing how amazing that art was. That to me is like the high point of art. Like you really like saw just how talented an artist Michelangelo was, and like just when you're in there, like just the figures just almost pop out at you. Like it's painted in such a way that it's very clear that Michelangelo knew like absolutely everything about angles and light and everything else to make these frescoes come to life, and for me, like he brings that to sort of the architecture of the Vatican. I do appreciate a lot of the churches that were built around that time. Not really into Gothic per se, or some of the other ones, but I certainly like them a lot better than, say, a lot of the modern architecture. And the problem with a lot of modern architecture is they're built for the inside, right? Like they're not built for the outside. They're not necessarily looking to have a 300-year time horizon, because a lot of houses, for example, like get torn down every 20, 30 years. Instead, it's it's all about like the livability of the space. A lot of glass is used, so the people on the inside have a great view, but from the outside, it just sort of looks like nothing. It's almost like a mirage. It's a simulacrum almost. So yeah, I like architecture that looks like something that seems to have purpose and stuff. I haven't been to the Taj Mahal or the Hagia Sophia or many of these places where like I would love to see it, but I would say like Renaissance is definitely my favorite, possibly because I have seen it, and I do appreciate like so much of the stuff in Rome that accompanied that. All right, quantum computing thread, I already covered that. If you could really know who Satoshi is, would you want to? That's a great question. I don't think so. First of all, like it depends, like whether it's public or private. So by public, I mean like, does everyone else know? Then it doesn't hurt anything for me to know, right? Like at that point, it's just sort of like, okay, well, this person signed it, great. Now we know who it is. I think that person might have a little bit too much of a say in the protocol decisions and stuff like that. So I think that would be a potential danger. So I wouldn't want Satoshi to become public for that reason, unless it's clear that Satoshi is dead or something like that. But if it's private, meaning that I'm like entrusted with the secret that this person is Satoshi, I wouldn't want it. I don't want that responsibility. I don't want to be a single point of failure there. I don't want to be exposed. I don't want the attack surface for exposing Satoshi to be enlarged because of me. So I don't think I would want that. In the book of Genesis, do you think it's coincidence that Abel raised lambs for meat to eat and pleased God, and Cain grew grains and did not get approval? Is that the Bible advising us all to be carnivore? I have heard this theory before. I don't know if that's really biblical per se. I don't think it's, say, Orthodox Christian or Jewish belief. But it is interesting that, an animal is a much bigger sacrifice than grain, right? And that's something that you have to recognize, is that if you bring a lamb is worth a lot more money than just some wheat or something like that, and generally requires a lot more in the way of resources in order to raise. So that might be a part of that Cain and Abel story, because Abel did bring a sacrifice, for of a lamb, whereas Cain brought some vegetables. So maybe it was a bigger sacrifice by Abel, but does that point to more carnivore meat eating? I don't know. I do think that meat is more nutritious, and there is some evidence, even biblically, that was the case. Talk about ego, man. You guys are losing it. Yeah, possibly. Who cares though? Recommendations and financial outlook for average family of 4 mid-30s. The financial outlook is a little bit grim because at least a family right now has much less than a generation ago. It's much harder to afford a house, or even a place to rent and things like that. College tuition is going through the roof. Healthcare costs are going up. But the good news is that we have Bitcoin, so there's some level of financial sanity in an insane market. And if you have Bitcoin, I think I think if you hold Bitcoin, I think you'll be okay. But if you're just sort of like trying to make your way in the world as a family of 4, it's going to be fairly difficult, right? And you're going to have to work harder than your parents did, you and possibly your spouse or whatever, and that's going to be the case. It's going to be harder to just sort of support your family and so on. So I don't envy your position, unless you have Bitcoin, in which case things will probably be at least a little bit easier. Hypothetically speaking, why would someone understand Bitcoin first and then start thinking it's divine intervention, begin to see both the world and one's faith from a different perspective? Asking for a friend, obviously. Well, first of all, we've been lied to about money all our lives, and that's what Bitcoin sort of exposes, is that we were lied to about fiat money, inflation, and all of these other things, and told that it wasn't that when it actually was. They were lying for their own benefit, right? The powers that be. And you take that to sort of that natural skepticism or the desire to verify and not trust into other spheres of your life, and very quickly you find out they've been lying to you in all sorts of other places. So diet, for example, they've been telling you that sugar is good, fat is bad. That's definitely not the case. That cholesterol is the most important indicator and things like that. That's not the case. You start looking into this stuff and you realize just how much of it is just propaganda for the benefit of a few. And it's very easy to see and go from there to, okay, well, what else have they been lying to us about? The sort of dominant worldview, or the default worldview these days, is atheism. And it's like, okay, is that actually rational? And thinking about because like it or not, like atheism is very dark, right? Like it's you have no purpose, no meaning. Everything is just sort of random. It's and I mean, you might believe that's true, but it's still kind of dark. So in a sense, it's like why is this the default? Why is this sort of like the way we're more or less taught? And that's when you start thinking about some of this other stuff and asking questions. And if you actually honestly go and search out that stuff, I think you'll find that there are pretty good arguments for Christianity that not a lot of people really acknowledge. They tend to see Bitcoin or not see Christianity as a straw man, from a straw man's perspective instead of what it actually is. And that's kind of what happens. Now there are people that think it's divine intervention, possibly because Bitcoin is just so good, right? Like it does sort of like remove a lot of the evils of the fiat monetary system, and in a sense, so you can say, okay, like there's something that is very good about it. And if you believe as a Christian that all good things come from God, then yeah, I mean, in that sense, it would be divine intervention. And and of course, that's going to cast a different perspective on everything. What do you have against Decred? I don't have that much against Decred. I mean, it's just it's an altcoin, and I don't think they're Bitcoin. And yeah, I mean, they're trying something new. They're trying to run it as a democracy, but that's still governance, and that's still a single point of failure. So I don't think it's quote unquote decentralized. How can you be sure that any wallet manufacturer, hardware or software, does not simply produce wallets that the manufacturers can steal? How can you be sure that the audited open source software is running on those respective hardware wallets? Thanks, Jimmy. And this song is done. Well, if you're, yeah, so great question. How do you verify sort of like a hardware wallet? It's very difficult to, unless you happen to be like a hardware engineer and a software engineer, and you can look at the hardware, the software, the firmware, and everything else. But the nice thing is, like, a lot of these things don't have an internet connection unless you plug it in, right? And if you're running it offline, like you have the option definitely with like Trezor, Ledger, and Coldcard, I believe, where you're running the whole thing offline, and you sign things that way. It's going to be very difficult for the manufacturer to steal, especially if you're generating your own seed, which you can do in many ways, and all of these have some recovery thing that lets you do that. Now, you can write your own firmware and load it using firmware loader and things like that. But then it's hard to know. But the way to sort of like go around that is use multisig. And if you have 3 or 5 and you have 5 different manufacturers, even if 2 of them are screwing you over and can coordinate and know which devices you have, you're still kind of protected. So yeah. All right. Hi, Jimmy. Is it by design that Bitcoin is understood best and first from those who are in need and hardworking, and then sold from those who don't deserve it or underappreciate it, and then to be bought from those that understand it late when the price hits trillions? I'm amazed. Well, I mean, people buy it when they finally understand it, right? And I mean, deserve is kind of a loaded word, and it comes from morality and stuff like that. And I don't know what your notion of cosmic justice is, but the people that did put in the work to go and understand it generally tend to buy it. But then again, it could be you bought it because your friend told you. But depending on the depth of understanding, you're going to hold more if you're going to hold more and longer if you really understand it versus if you don't, in which case you might sell it and do other stuff. So it does sort of reward virtue in that way, but I think all things in life are kind of like that. Unless fiat money comes in and sort of like unbalances the scales or whatever. And that's sort of the nature of reality, and that's what we call virtue, is this thing that allows you to navigate reality in a way that's beneficial to reality itself and to yourself. That's what virtuous action is. If you're lying all the time, you're only really ultimately screwing yourself. I mean, you might screw other people over, but it's your reputation that's going to be damaged and so on. So in that way, Bitcoin accumulation does come down to some level of virtue, and that's something that I wrote about many years ago. About Bitcoin and virtue, and I looked at prudence, temperance, justice, and fortitude. Go look those up if you're interested. I have one on a 51% attack. My understanding is if someone managed to secure 51% of hash power, it could produce a corrupted block. How do nodes react then? Could you walk through how the current protocol stops this, and under what circumstances would it succeed, however unlikely? Well, what do you mean by corrupted block is the real question. If they create a block that the other nodes recognize as false, then even if you have 51% or even 99% of the network or of the hashing power, none of the other nodes will accept it, in which case it's not Bitcoin. It would be some hard fork of Bitcoin or something like that. And it would just instantly get rejected and wait for a miner that actually followed the rules. So if you're mining something and it's not valid, then it's kind of a non-starter. And this is one of the genius ways in which running a full node gives you a lot of self-sovereignty, because you are checking every block to see if it follows the rules. And if it doesn't, even if it's made by a very powerful miner with 99% of the hash power, you reject it, and so does everybody else, as long as they're following the same rules as you. So at that point, it would be very obvious that this person either made a mistake or is malicious, in which case they would probably be disconnected from everybody else, and you would chug along with whatever hash power you have. The thing about a 51% attack is that it allows you to double spend. So you can mine blocks that are perfectly valid, but overwrite some other blocks, and that would be the way to attack, and that only really allows you to double spend your own coins, and doesn't let you steal from everybody else or whatever. So that could certainly happen, and maybe it does happen once in a while with ZeroConf or whatever. But there's a very easy solution. You just wait like a few confirmations, and each confirmation gives you significant amount of security. So I think the protocol stops this just fine. You're running your full node and you check everything, and that's what everyone does. What does Jesus mean to you? Why? He is my Lord and Savior, and I am dedicating my whole life to him. And I believe that he came to save me from my sins, and I believe this because I believe it is true, not because it makes me feel better or that it's convenient fiction or anything like that atheists say. I say that because I believe it to be true. This is a description of reality, and it's the thing that makes the most sense. And from a very technical perspective, I'm a pretty technical person, and I try to think about things from first principles and so on. And if you do, and you're honest about it, I believe that you would come to Jesus too. So, but that's my opinion. Obviously, not everyone shares that, so take that as you will. I'm in the dark about the programs or layers that will run on Bitcoin and Ethereum. Can you talk about that? Maybe point one in a direction to learn more about that. Yeah, learn about the Lightning Network. Ethereum is completely useless. I wouldn't say that. It is useful for running scams and so on. So, but on Lightning, Lightning Network is on top of Bitcoin. There's a lot of resources that you can go and look and learn about it. So yeah. Is it going up or down tomorrow? Be careful if you're open to questions. Yeah, I don't know, and that's the thing. I recently talked to somebody at the Bitcoin Standard Conference, and they were like, I listened to your podcast. The thing I like about your podcast is that you never mention price even once. And I didn't realize that I hadn't mentioned price. It wasn't like I was actively avoiding it. But that is something that I don't necessarily think that much about. I mean, I do know the price when I look at it, of course. And I am excited when it is pumping and so on. But going up and down on a day-to-day basis, that's very, high time preference thinking. I care about where it is 5 years from now. And, so far it's done very, very well over the last 5 years and the 5 years before that and so on. So I think it's fine. I don't need to talk about that. What are your favorite on-chain metrics for price signals? I think Willy Woo has some, but again, I don't necessarily look at on-chain metrics for that sort of thing. I think, I've said this before. I think stock to flow is the only thing that's ever made sense to me as far as predicting the price of Bitcoin from a fundamental perspective. Everything else is just sort of like, okay, here are some triangles and things like that. And I get it. There are sort of human cognitive biases that go into sort of price action that manifests itself. But that's not what why I invest in Bitcoin, because of triangles or human cognitive biases. I invest in Bitcoin, or I bought Bitcoin because I think it's better money and that it's better for me and better for you and everything else. So I don't look at on-chain metrics. Willy Woo does. I would suggest that you go and seek out his many YouTube videos. Why is the volume on exchanges so low with the price going up? Well, I mean, it used to be that trading one Bitcoin was like a few $100s. Now one Bitcoin is like 50,000. So that's the volume naturally is going to be lower in Bitcoin terms. In dollar terms, it just sort of heats up as the bull market goes, and I imagine it'll break all sorts of records soon enough. It's just we're waiting for the big bull run and for that to happen. Jimmy, please talk about how fiat has ultimately led to war amongst humans, how the current geopolitical state of the world is teetering on that line, especially in the USA, and how Bitcoin is clearly our best shot at diminishing the effects of the potential mass chaos that could occur. So here's the main argument. So wars existed, obviously, before fiat money, and people have been going to war for a long time. But the thing about war is that it is sort of like mutually assured destruction. So you have to have a really good reason to do it. And traditionally, the reason that people had to go to war was to go get more resources. So it's easier essentially to go and steal from somebody else than to produce your own stuff. And especially if you have a nice juicy bounty, and usually they take all of the resource or threaten to take all of the resources, and you might get a negotiated settlement like a tribute or something like that. Or if they don't submit and you enter a siege or whatever, they end up selling everybody that they capture into slavery and things like that. It was an economic decision, essentially. It was, okay, if it costs more for me to go and conquer this territory, they just wouldn't do it. It didn't make any sense. I mean, like, of course, it's very hard to predict how much it was going to be, but, after a certain time, like, you cut your losses and go home or whatever, or more likely you run out of money and you go home, whatever. So war was fairly limited because it was there was economic calculation involved. Like there was cost that you had to calculate and the benefits that you might get and so on. If you conquered sort of a territory that no one wanted, that didn't have much wealth or whatever, you weren't going to do that unless it cost like really, really cheap. And for the most part, war was limited for that reason. What changed with fiat money, and specifically World War I, was that wars became much more ideological. So World War I, and to some degree the Civil War in the United States, they were ideological in the sense that it wasn't for economic benefit. It was ideological. There was a principle at stake, and the victor had to have total victory in order to do that. So during the Civil War, it was to keep the Union together. It wasn't an economic calculation. It wasn't the North saying, you know what, like we need to conquer the South in order to have more resources and so on. That was of course true in the sense that you would be able to produce more economic output, having more territory and so on. But the post-war years and the Reconstruction and all that, like it was like the Civil War cost so much in money and lives and so on that it didn't make any economic sense whatsoever. You reduce capacity significantly as a result of that war. And not didn't gain anything. So economically, it wasn't that. But the North did conquer the South, and it was total war. There was no negotiated settlement, large part because it was ideological. Like Lincoln wasn't going to stop unless the South was completely subdued, and there wasn't going to be a negotiated settlement because it was ideological in nature. Similar with World War One. Woodrow Wilson was actually the one that coined the term. We need to make the world safe for democracy. It was an ideological war against sort of monarchies and so on, and he was said to be absolutely thrilled when the Russian Revolution happened in the middle of World War One, because Russia was part of the Allies, right? Like it was Great Britain, France, and Russia, and U.S. came in later. But they were the one monarchy, and he was glad that it would be sort of like the semi-democratic powers that would ultimately prevail and so on, and that was his thing. So it becomes this very when you have fiat money, it becomes ideological and becomes a total war instead of being an economic calculation. Because when you have fiat money, you don't need to go get other resources. You have the resources of your entire population, and you can grab them anytime you want through inflation. So, the lack of economic calculation is what causes such evil in war when you have fiat money, and that's why it's so bad. And when you bring Bitcoin back, sound money, hard money back. It does become more of an economic calculation, and given how just amazing trade is, and how global trade is, and how profitable trade is, I think you get a lot better behavior, especially from governments, and much less war as a result. All right. Hello, Jimmy. Robert Breedlove says that proof of stake will eventually self-destruct. What is your take on that? Some say that mining pools will destroy proof of work and do not make proof of work decentralized anymore. What is your take on this? Well, let's answer the second one first. You have lots of mining pools, and they do decide on what block it is right now, and that's based on Stratum V1. Stratum V2, which some pools are running, the individual miner gets to decide on the block. So it's not centralizing in the least. It's just sort of pooling for the sake of variance reduction and payouts. But yeah, I think it's completely decentralized, because miners can leave pools whenever they want and join other pools, and they do that all the time. So I don't think there's anything like that. Proof of stake will definitely self-destruct, because it's an oligarchy. It's whoever has the most money gets to make more money, and they're the ones that keep getting richer at the expense of everybody that's poorer. And if that sounds familiar, it should. It's exactly how central bank backed fiat money works. And you'll have Cantillon effect winners and so on. In a sense, like, it's already proof of stake, because anything that had a pre-mine, because they are the ones that are most interested in that succeeding and so on. And they basically printed a bunch of money for themselves, but they did it beforehand instead of afterwards. And that's the sad reality of proof of stake. It's not just at all. What's under your cowboy hat, Jimmy? Just my head. I wish I could say like a speech or something like that. Apparently that's where Lincoln kept his speeches and things like that. But no, I don't have anything under my cowboy hat. Should there be secession in the United States? Secession, I think, is what this person is asking. Yeah, I think so. I think a lot of states are way too big, and there's no reason for them to be. I think we should try lots of different systems and see what works out, and let the market decide, instead of a few powerful people that happen to be in the right positions at the right time. So that's my hope anyway. All right, let's look at the next question. If you were starting Bitcoin related dev today, would you get into core dev, Lightning Network, layer 3? That's a good question. It really depends on the opportunities that are present. I think right now a lot of effort is going into sort of like running your own node, Lightning node, and things like that. So places like Umbrel, Start9, those things look very interesting to me, because I think it's sort of ultimately going to be the base layer of of Web 3.0, a really decentralized internet where you don't have trusted third parties, and you can serve content to each other, sort of without anybody in the middle. And you can only do that if you're running servers. And these are sort of like the natural servers that people are running, and they're going to get more feature rich over time. So, I would love to see that develop, and that's probably where I would be. Besides sort of like, making sure that your Bitcoins are secure and things like that. And I think that's always going to be something that people need to work on. But yeah, I say that would be it. All right, thoughts on how the distribution of Bitcoin will unfold and evolve. Are we at risk of ending up in a similar place where there's an unequal distribution of value in society? I think you're always going to have an unequal distribution. Like that's just nature. Like there's never equal distribution of anything in nature. Like we don't have an equal number of roses growing all over the world. It's concentrated in certain places and grow better in certain places and so on. That's okay. That's a good thing. It's not about like equality of outcome. It's about equality of opportunity. And I think Bitcoin offers equality of opportunity, and like looking at distribution, I think is looking from the wrong end. It's all about opportunity, and if you have opportunity, that's fine. I would be interested to hear any thoughts you have on finding a church with principles and views you respect. I've really appreciated you sharing your views on Bitcoin, natural law, and lots of other topics. Yeah, I mean, this has been kind of a struggle for me because the church I was attending, started promoting a lot of the coronavirus stuff, which I didn't like, and then started promoting some of the Black Lives Matter stuff, which I didn't agree with. I don't think it's appropriate for church and things like that. So, I mean, finding a church is going to be generally a difficult thing. But I have found one heuristic that's pretty good, which is, are they requiring masks or not? And if they're requiring masks, then I think they're more subservient to the state than to God, and that tells me that they're more like competing to be better rule followers than everybody else, which honestly is kind of like Pharisee-ish, rather than serving God in deed and intent and so on. So yeah, I think for finding a church, that's a criteria I've been using. That said, I haven't found one, and I've been looking for over a year now. So, like a lot of churches are very, masky and, sort of rule following and stuff. And yeah, I don't know. It's going to be difficult, but I would encourage you to keep looking until you find something that is sort of like a church that is dedicated to doing what God says instead of what the state says. What do you personally hope you can do related to Bitcoin fixes this? I hope to bring sound money to the world, and I think getting on a Bitcoin standard fixes a lot of stuff, and that's what this podcast has been about. And bringing that about, whether through writing books or teaching people Bitcoin development, or debunking altcoins or whatever, or convincing people that this really is the more moral money. That's what I'm hoping to do, is convince people that that Bitcoin is it. All right, will NFTs be on Bitcoin? There already have been NFTs, and this started in 2013. And like people act like NFTs are brand new. They're not. They've been around. They have no value. This like NFTs are like the ultimate simulacrum. They have no binding to the thing that they supposedly represent. So yeah, I don't think they're useful in Bitcoin. Can Bitcoin help prevent religious ideological wars? I mean, if you mean by that sort of like the total wars of the 20th century, which were ideological in nature, then yeah, I think so. Like if you mean by religious ideological, I think you mean maybe like Protestant versus Catholic or something like that in various countries. I think that if you actually study them, the case for those is way overblown. Vast majority of wars are actually about economics, about conquering one another for some economic reason or for hatreds or for historical past things and things like that. It's not about religion at all. There are some, of course, but they're a tiny minority. Vast majority of things are because of economics, and you should really study history before making a claim like that, if that's what you meant. In the context of private Bitcoin sales, is it possible that private networks of people, whales, high net worth institutions, could limit equal access to Bitcoin? Do we need a commitment to sell publicly? I mean, I suppose they could, but the thing about like Bitcoin is that it's fairly liquid. So if you want to just go buy, market buy a bunch of it, you can. And the only reason you would do private sales is so that you don't get too much slippage if you're selling, and hopefully you get a slightly better deal if you're buying than, having slippage on the upside. So, and like these only matter if you're buying in large amounts. So like, talking about equal access there doesn't really make sense, because for anyone that's poorer, then you're just going to pay the market price, and that's the fair price, and you don't have to worry about slippage one way or the other. And really all these whales are trying to do is get the price that's market based, and for a large amount. That's it. Any plans to add to your programming Bitcoin book? Eventually I want to do a programming wallet book, and after that maybe a programming lightning book. It's kind of slow going though, because there's a lot to cover and standards are changing, and maybe I'll have a second edition of programming Bitcoin as well. But yeah, that's the plan at the moment. All right, I already answered that question. What will Bitcoin UX look like in 10 years? Great question. I don't know. I wish I knew, because in a sense, you're going to see Bitcoin UX change, and it'll be based on like what people like and what makes sense to people and what sort of paradigm people come up with that are the easiest to understand, and that's going to take some time to get. But yeah, I don't know. I don't think I like, if you asked me 20 years ago what will like cell phones look like, I would have said I don't know. Like I imagine they'll be pretty slick looking, but like people think it's obvious after the fact, but beforehand it's very hard to think of good UX. Bitcoin ETF pros and cons. The obvious pros are that there will be more people interested, and certainly a lot of institutions will kind of have to buy it, which means that the price will go up. But the cons are that it's not your keys, not your Bitcoin, and you can do weird things with it, like gold ETFs do, which is sell Bitcoin that isn't there, and this is a way of fractional reserve lending out Bitcoin that doesn't exist. So you can sort of have that, but we'll see. It depends on their transparency, and like because Bitcoin has proof of reserves and things like that, it very well could be managed in a way that the cons are sort of negated a little bit. If someone wanted to transition to an engineering job in the Bitcoin Lightning ecosystem, what curriculum would you recommend to learn? Programming Bitcoin chain code seminars, mastering Lightning Network. What next steps would you take after doing some of these materials? Well, usually after I teach, I tell people like go contribute to open source, and like that's a good way to sort of like bootstrap and show people what you can do and stuff like that. And then go, apply to some of these jobs that are out there. And if it's like with a company that has an open API or something like that, use their API to build something. Like that's what they want to see, and that you're comfortable with what they're building. And yeah, I would say go and do that if that's where you want to be. All right. Is a token issued on Liquid a shitcoin? Yes, no, why? I mean, this might be controversial, but I mean, it's a completely centralized thing if you're issuing it on any platform, including Liquid. So yeah, I would say it's at least an altcoin. Is it a scam necessarily? I don't know. It depends on what you're using it for. If it's like, if you're very clear about what it's useful for, and you're not like doing a pre-sale or pre-mining a bunch or something like that, then I don't think it's necessarily a scam. But I don't know. I don't necessarily think you should be releasing like coins, new coins on these things, without a really, really good reason. What is our defensive position against Muzero? I don't know what that is. Is Bitcoin best feature is that it doesn't have CEO and boards. Yes, it's decentralized. It doesn't have a center. That is the big one. Do you think Satoshi Light's Litecoin remains a testnet for Bitcoin's features, truly making the silver to Bitcoin's gold? If so, why and how? I don't think it is. I mean, it did for that one particular thing with SegWit, but they haven't updated their code base to keep up with all of the Bitcoin stuff. And I don't think they have enough engineering power to integrate Taproot, for example, and activate it on their network before it goes on Bitcoin's. They had a small role in the 2017 era. I don't think they're going to continue in that role, or at least the past 4 years have shown that they don't. And they were gonna like do some confidential transactions and stuff like that. As far as I can tell, they don't have enough developers or anything like that. Do you like pineapple on pizza? Back when I ate pizza, I did, but I don't eat pizza or pineapples anymore. So there you go. Is Lightning Network integral part of Bitcoin or just one of many applications built atop? If the latter, does it mean that potentially anyone can build a competing app? Well, Lightning is a layer on top of Bitcoin, and I think you really need to study Lightning before asking this question, because the second one, it doesn't really make sense. It is an application built on top in the sense that you can do different things on the Lightning Network, and you could potentially come up with some other way of doing it. I think state chains and side chains are different ways to do that, and you can definitely build apps on those as well. But yeah, you need to understand both before asking this question, and understanding you have to be fairly creative to come up with something like that. What happened to guys like Roger Ver, Vitalik, and Trace Mayer? They are all on the original Bitcoin documentaries, and now they've abandoned Bitcoin. There are so many others that have left as well. Yeah, I mean, the siren song of altcoins is always there, and this is something that I write about in my newsletter a while ago. Is that if you're a non-technical founder or a non-technical OG, you're going to be tempted away at some point by riches, and you think of yourself as a genius for finding this asset that's 1000x or whatever, and you think that you can do that for other things, and that's sort of the trap that Roger Ver and Trace Mayer and even Vitalik to some degree have fallen into. So yeah. All right, so I already answered the quantum computing question. How does borrowing against your Bitcoin work? So basically the way it works is you borrow some amount of dollars and you put Bitcoin as your collateral, and you have to over collateralize. Typically, I think most people do 200% or something like that. So you put up 2 Bitcoin, you get a $50,000 loan, something like that. And the loan has an interest rate, say it's 9 or 10%, 10% to keep it simple. So at the end of 1 year, you owe, $55,000. Now you can sell some of your collateral to pay for it, or you could roll over that loan, and you would need to, assuming the Bitcoin price stays the same, you would need to add more Bitcoin to get another loan to roll over. Otherwise, if Bitcoin went up by say 100% and it's now worth $200,000, you can take out a bigger loan or whatever. There's a lot of ways in which that can work, and there are a lot of people that take advantage of this, but it's actual money or dollars that somebody else is giving up in opportunity cost for you to loan it. So it's not ex nihilo loans like mortgages and so on. So it's actually a much more honest borrowing. If you want to get into a Bitcoin related job, but you neither know finance nor coding, what do you recommend? Should one try to learn to code? Where are the opportunities? Well, it depends on your particular skills, right? Like if you are an accountant, I would try to look for an accounting firm that does Bitcoin related stuff. I know you asked for non-finance background, but if you're a marketer, I would look for opportunities where you can market Bitcoin, right? And plenty of that out there. There's a lot of podcasters that are looking for good marketing. If you're good at that or whatever, if you're in sales, go find a Bitcoin sales job. There's lots of those, and if you're, whatever it is that you happen to be good at, find the cross section between that and Bitcoin and go and find opportunities in that regard. And a lot of these companies are hiring, so they need all sorts of roles, and it's not just finance and coding. But if you happen to be good at coding, then yeah, go for it, and that's a nice way to get in, and you'll probably get compensated very well for it. Can you talk about nation-state attack vectors, specifically the potential of a state-sponsored 51% attack, regulatory attacks more potent than the infrastructure bill, seeing how two got crypto Twitter rattled? Is Bitcoin or crypto Twitter's understanding of that threat weak? So the state-sponsored 51% attack I already sort of debunked, and the empty block attack. There are sort of like game theoretical things that the state can do to try to mitigate that, but then like there are things that we can do as a community and so on. So it's kind of a back and forth thing, and I would encourage you to go read that first. Regulatory attacks are more interesting, but in a sense, as soon as a state actor behaves badly, I think a lot of the Bitcoin holders just kind of leave, or go underground or in the black market or something like that. So in a sense, like, it doesn't matter that much. I mean, it just might make it kind of inconvenient for the people that are actually owning Bitcoin, but Bitcoin itself is not going to get affected that much. What is the state of DeFi on top of Bitcoin, and what are some interesting projects? I mean, I really hate that word, decentralized finance, because it's centralized all over the place. I would say that DLCs are the closest thing to what you're talking about, and there's a lot of companies working on that. It's Atomic Finance, SureBits, and several others are working on those, and they have some interesting things. Are you down to help us start selling these? I guess this is like, altcoin branded toilet paper. I don't think so. I use a bidet and like use very few sheets of toilet paper when I do go to the toilet. So yeah. How do you view Bitcoin's role in ensuring decentralized data storage and ownership? I mean, I don't think you need decentralized data storage, right? Like there are like backing up your data is kind of a solved problem, right? Like you put it on a hard drive, put it in someplace safe, or you use online encrypted backups and all sorts of places. There's a lot of ways in which you can back up your data. So I don't think you need to quote unquote solve that. It's already solved, and I don't think Bitcoin necessarily has a role other than maybe paying for it. Why are Bitcoin guys Trump supporters? Does crypto automatically associate with fascism? This is obviously a troll, but I think a lot of Bitcoin guys are Trump supporters because he's less authoritarian and less pro-war than the other ones. That's it. And I don't think he's a fascist. I don't think you understand what fascism means. All right, let's see here. Let me block this one guy. All right. Why do multiple guests speak your name to you over and over during your interview? Because they just like doing that. That's how they speak. What incentives does a country on the Bitcoin standard have to stay on said standard? Well, because it's really hard money, and that's what the populace wants to use, and they might be overthrown if they don't stay on the Bitcoin standard. There you go. Why wouldn't said country abuse the trust of its investors by doing a repeat of the gold standard going into fiat? Because you can hold your own keys, right? This is one of the wonderful things about Bitcoin is that you can possess it without taking a security risk. With gold, if you had a 400-ounce gold bar at home, then it was possible for a thief to go steal it. You can have a treasure in your house, but unless the thief happens to be a hardware hacker and knows your passcode or something like that, it's not likely to be stolen. So it's not worth like physically stealing, right? Like, and it's going to be very difficult to get it out of a person. Not that it's impossible, but it's much more difficult than gold is. So this is why Bitcoin is a very different animal than gold. Its non-physical nature and multi-sig capability and ability to back up and things like that make it very difficult to steal, and that means that people can possess it themselves and making it a bearer instrument that people actually use as a bearer instrument. So that's why it's going to be hard for a country to abuse it, because there's no like sort of central party to trust. I mean, there still will be, and people will get burned by that, but they'll learn their lesson. Starting point for software developers to begin for Bitcoin core dev. Read my book, Programming Bitcoin. Is there anyone building cybersecurity products for crypto? Yeah, tons of them. I would say hardware wallets are definitely that. And yeah, there's probably like I would say Unchained Capital, Casa. Those are sort of cybersecurity products as well. So. Yeah, all right. That, I think, is about all the questions. This went way longer than I thought. I'm seeing at like an hour and 24 minutes. And that's okay, because I really love answering your questions. And I think I'll have to do these a little more frequently, because that was really fun. All right. Fiat Delenda S, this song is done. Unchained Capital is a sponsor of this podcast. I am a proud advisor of a company that is working to achieve security for the Bitcoin network. If you need multi-sig, collaborative custody, or Bitcoin native financial solutions, learn more at unchained.com. Well, that wraps it up for this episode of Bitcoin Fixes This. I can be found on Twitter at Jimmy Song, and my website is programmingbitcoin.com. Until next time, Fiat Delenda Est.